Hyperinflation in Zimbabwe. In the late 20th century, Zimbabwe was marked by a tumultuous political landscape. After gaining independence from British colonial rule in 1980, the country was led by Prime Minister Robert Mugabe and his party, the Zimbabwe African National Union Patriotic Front, ZANU-PF. Initially celebrated for its liberation struggle and educational reforms, Mugabe's government increasingly turned authoritarian over the years. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, opposition to Mugabe's regime grew, culminating in the formation of the Movement for Democratic Change in 1999. The political environment became increasingly polarized and violent, with the government responding to dissent with crackdowns and allegations of human rights abuses. Electoral disputes further destabilized the country, especially the contested elections in 2000 and 2002, which were marred by violence and alleged fraud. During the 1990s, Zimbabwe experienced a sharp economic decline. Initially one of the more prosperous countries in Africa, the economy began to suffer due to a combination of factors including poor agricultural policies, land reform initiatives, and the legacy of colonialism. The fast-track land reform program initiated in 2000 aimed to redistribute land from white commercial farmers to black Zimbabweans. While it was intended to rectify historical injustices, the abrupt and often violent implementation led to a collapse of the agricultural sector, which was vital to the economy. Hyperinflation began to spiral out of control in the early 2000s, reaching astronomical levels. By 2008, Zimbabwe's inflation rate was estimated to be in the millions of percent, effectively rendering the Zimbabwean dollar worthless. The economy became characterized by scarcity of basic goods, rampant unemployment, and declining industrial output. The social fabric of Zimbabwe was deeply affected by the economic crisis and political instability. The widespread poverty resulting from hyperinflation significantly altered daily life. Many families struggled to afford basic necessities, including food, healthcare, and education. Malnutrition rates soared as the agricultural crisis led to food shortages, forcing many to rely on international aid. Social norms began to shift as desperation took hold. Barter systems emerged as the currency lost value, with people exchanging goods and services directly. Informal markets proliferated, allowing citizens to circumvent shortages and the collapsing economy. However, this led to a further erosion of formal economic structures and government authority. For the average Zimbabwean, daily life became increasingly difficult. The scarcity of essentials meant long lines at shops and fuel stations where people would wait for hours, often only to find empty shelves. Hyperinflation made prices volatile, changing several times within a single day, which made budgeting impossible. As a result, many people turned to the black market where prices were often exorbitantly high, but goods were available. Healthcare systems suffered greatly during this time. Hospitals were underfunded, and essential medical supplies became scarce. Many healthcare professionals left the country in search for better opportunities, exacerbating the public health crisis. Education, once a high point of pride in Zimbabwe, faced significant challenges as schools struggled to maintain operations. Many families could no longer afford school fees, leading to increased dropout rates and a generation at risk of losing access to education. Culturally, Zimbabwe in the early 2000s witnessed a growing expression of dissent through art, music, and literature. Activists and artists used their platforms to voice opposition to the government and raise awareness of social issues. Traditional forms of expression became intertwined with political commentary, fostering a sense of solidarity among the populace. Technologically, the late 20th and early 21st centuries saw the emergence of mobile communication. Despite the economic crisis, mobile phones began to gain popularity, becoming essential tools for communication and information sharing. This technology played a crucial role in organizing protests and sharing information about food and resource availability. Overall, the mood in Zimbabwe during this period was one of turmoil and uncertainty. While there were moments of hope and resilience among the populace, the pervasive sense of crisis, fueled by economic collapse and political repression, dominated daily life. The impact of hyperinflation was felt acutely across all segments of society, altering the relationship between the government and its citizens and leaving a lasting scar on the nation's collective memory. The hyperinflation in Zimbabwe, peaking in the late 2000s, represents one of the most extreme cases of inflation in modern history. This financial catastrophe unfolded through a series of interconnected events and processes characterized by economic mismanagement, political instability, and the collapse of institutional credibility. Zimbabwe's economy was once one of the most prosperous in Africa, largely due to its rich agricultural resources. However, by the late 1990s and early 2000s, a series of economic missteps began to unravel this success. The government's fast-track land reform program, initiated in 2000, aimed to redistribute land from white commercial farmers to black Zimbabweans. While the intent was to rectify historical injustices, the chaotic and often violent implementation resulted in the collapse of commercial agriculture, leading to significant declines in agricultural output and exports. Political instability and the perceived risks associated with investing in Zimbabwe deterred foreign investment. Economic sanctions imposed by Western nations in response to human rights violations further exacerbated the situation. As the agricultural sector faltered, the government turned to excessive borrowing and printing of money to finance its deficits. This approach led to the following. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe began to print large amounts of money to finance government spending, particularly to support its military and political initiatives. By increasing the money supply without corresponding economic growth, inflation began to surge. The Zimbabwean dollar was repeatedly devalued as the government sought to stabilize the economy. This, however, resulted in loss of confidence in the currency, leading to further devaluation and a vicious cycle of inflation. By 2000, inflation began to rise sharply. Initial rates were manageable, but by 2003, inflation reached over 600%. As the situation deteriorated, inflation rates soared. By 2006, it was reported at 1,000%, and by mid-2008, inflation reached a staggering 89.7 sextillion%, 89.7 times 10 to the 21st power, marking one of the highest inflation rates recorded in history. The rapid decline in purchasing power led to widespread public discontent. The population struggled to afford basic necessities, leading to protests and social unrest. As prices rose daily, many turned to bartering goods and services instead of using the increasingly worthless currency. The Zimbabwean government attempted to control inflation through price controls and wage freezes. However, these measures often resulted in shortages of goods, as suppliers could not meet the costs of production. Businesses were unable to operate profitably, leading to further economic collapse. In an attempt to stabilize the economy, the government introduced new denominations of the Zimbabwean dollar, including a $1 trillion note. However, these measures failed to restore confidence in the currency and did little to alleviate the crisis. By late 2008, the government began to allow the use of foreign currencies such as the US dollar and South African rand for transactions. This shift marked a significant departure from reliance on the Zimbabwean dollar, reflecting the complete loss of confidence in the national currency. In early 2009, Zimbabwe officially abandoned its currency, adopting the US dollar and other foreign currencies as legal tender. This move helped to stabilize prices and restore some level of economic activity, although it also highlighted the failure of the Zimbabwean dollar. The government's decision to print money was largely driven by the need to finance political and military activities amid growing unrest. The regime relied on monetary expansion to maintain control and suppress dissent. The Zimbabwean leadership adhered to a populist economic ideology that emphasized land redistribution and state control over the economy. This ideology often clashed with the realities of economic management and sustainability, leading to poor policy decisions. The scale of hyperinflation in Zimbabwe was unprecedented, with millions of percent inflation rates affecting every sector of the economy. As confidence eroded, many businesses shut down or relocated, exacerbating unemployment. The government's inability to provide basic services led to the deterioration of infrastructure, healthcare, and education systems, leaving lasting scars in the society. Two key figures who played pivotal roles in the hyperinflation crisis in Zimbabwe are Robert Mugabe, the longtime leader of Zimbabwe, and Gideon Gono, the governor of the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. Their actions and decisions significantly influenced the course of this financial disaster. Robert Mugabe was born on February 21, 1924, in what was then southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. He received his education in mission schools and later attended Fort Hare University in South Africa. Mugabe was involved in politics from an early age and became a prominent figure in the liberation struggle against British colonial rule and white minority rule in Rhodesia. He became the leader of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, a key faction in the fight for independence. After the successful liberation of Zimbabwe in 1980, Mugabe became the country's first prime minister and later its president. Mugabe was known for his charisma and intelligence, as well as his strong ideological commitment to socialism and nationalism. However, he also displayed authoritarian tendencies and was often described as vindictive towards opponents. His leadership style became increasingly repressive over time, marked by a refusal to accept criticism or opposition. Mugabe's motivations were driven by a blend of ideology and a desire to maintain power. He viewed land reform as a means of rectifying historical injustices, believing that redistributing land from white farmers to black Zimbabweans was essential for national identity and pride. However, the economic realities of implementing such policies often took a backseat to political considerations and the need to suppress dissent. Mugabe's government initiated the fast-track land reform program in 2000, which aimed to redistribute land, but resulted in the chaotic seizure of commercial farms. This led to a collapse in agricultural production, which had been the backbone of Zimbabwe's economy. His decision to print money to finance government deficits further exacerbated hyperinflation. Instead of addressing the underlying economic problems, Mugabe focused on maintaining his grip on power, often at the expense of sound economic policies. Mugabe's leadership and policies directly contributed to the hyperinflation crisis. His refusal to acknowledge the failures of his land reform program and his reliance on monetary expansion eroded public trust in the government and the national currency. His actions ultimately led to a catastrophic economic decline, culminating in one of the most severe cases of hyperinflation in history. Gideon Gono was born on November 17, 1959, in Zimbabwe. He had a background in banking and finance, having studied at the University of Zimbabwe and later pursuing further studies in economics. Gono began his career in the banking sector and served as the chief executive of the Commercial Bank of Zimbabwe before his appointment as the governor of the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, RBZ, in 2003. Gono was known for his intelligence, charisma, and adeptness in public relations. He presented himself as a technocrat and was initially perceived as a reformer who could stabilize the economy. However, as the hyperinflation crisis escalated, his reputation became tarnished due to the failure of his policies. Gono's motivations included a mix of ambition and a desire to improve Zimbabwe's economic situation. Upon his appointment, he sought to implement monetary policies that could stabilize the economy and restore confidence in the banking system. However, he faced immense pressure from Mugabe's administration to finance government spending, which ultimately compromised his ability to execute effective monetary policy. As governor of the RBZ, Gono initially attempted to implement strategies to curb inflation, including raising interest rates and controlling money supply growth. However, under the mounting pressure from the government to finance its deficits, he resorted to printing vast amounts of money. His infamous introduction of larger denominations of the Zimbabwean dollar, including a $100 trillion note, became emblematic of the hyperinflation crisis. Gono also launched a series of rescue plans, including the Zimbabwe Economic Recovery Program, ZERP, which aimed to stabilize the economy through various monetary and fiscal measures. However, these efforts were largely ineffective and overshadowed by the rampant inflation fueled by government policies. Gono's role as the head of the RBZ uniquely shaped the hyperinflation event. His inability to resist political pressures led to the adoption of unsustainable monetary policies that facilitated hyperinflation. While he started as a hopeful figure, Gono's legacy became intertwined with the economic collapse, demonstrating the challenges faced by technocrats in an environment dominated by political interests. The hyperinflation experienced in Zimbabwe during the late 2000s had profound immediate and long-term impacts on the nation's economy, political landscape, social structure, and cultural identity. This financial crisis not only altered the trajectory of Zimbabwe, but also provided critical lessons for global financial practices. In the aftermath of hyperinflation, Zimbabwe's economy underwent significant transformations. The adoption of the US dollar as the main currency stabilized prices and restored some level of economic activity. However, this move also demonstrated the pitfalls of relying solely on foreign currencies and highlighted the need for sound monetary policies. The economic crisis significantly weakened the political standing of Mugabe and the ZANU-PF party. The widespread dissatisfaction with the government's handling of the economy led to increased support for opposition parties. In 2009, a power-sharing agreement was reached, leading to the formation of a coalition government with the MDC. This shift marked a significant change in Zimbabwe's political landscape. The hyperinflation crisis contributed to social fragmentation and an increase in inequality. While some citizens managed to navigate the crisis through informal networks, others were left behind, exacerbating socioeconomic divides. The experience of hyperinflation also fueled a sense of mistrust and disillusionment among the populace towards government institutions. Economic instability prompted many professionals and skilled workers to emigrate in search of better opportunities. This brain drain weakened Zimbabwe's human capital and further hampered the potential for economic recovery in subsequent years. The hyperinflation in Zimbabwe had immediate and long lasting impacts that reshaped the economy, politics, and society of the nation. While the crisis led to economic collapse and social upheaval, it also provided critical lessons on financial management, governance, and resilience. The legacy of hyperinflation serves as a reminder of the complexities involved in managing an economy and the vital importance of sound policies to protect citizens from the consequences of financial mismanagement.